Falcon 220, standby, departure.
It is reported the aircraft has gone down and we need to get there fast.
They come at time.
Confirm details of, correction, the point where the aircraft crashed.
We understand it is Kibiko area. We're trying to, well, we'll give you the details when we get there.
Low-quality video recorded on phone by one of the first people to arrive at the scene of a terrible accident. The twisted carnage of an aircraft that fell out of the sky minutes ago lies crumpled on the ground amid small fires that eat up the morning fog. Wads of half-burnt 1,000 shilling notes smolder in the wreckage. But there's more. This eyewitness presses on, hardly believing his eyes. Jesus Christ. Then he comes upon something that he'll likely never forget. About an hour later, the country's morning is interrupted by news flashes on TV and radio.
Hasa after kama dakika moja tulisikia kitu imeanguka na ikabust into flames.
The press has now confirmed who is lying dead in Kibiko Forest in the Ngong Hills, and hardly anybody can hide their shock.
Preliminary investigation suggests that the helicopter crash that claimed the lives of two cabinet ministers, Internal Security Minister Professor George Saitoti, his assistant Orwa Ojode.
George Saitoti's death leaves a significant gap in Kenyan politics.
We have lost here the Minister for Internal Security, Honorable George Saitoti, Assistant Minister for Internal Security, Honorable Orwa Ojode.
Orwa Ojode's wife learns about the crash on television. Alongside the families of Luko Yugi and Captain Nancy Getwanja, Sergeant Thomas Moremi and George Saitoti's longtime bodyguard, Inspector Joshua Tonke. The death of Saitoti was especially poignant. Just 2 days earlier, he was talking to his fellow parliamentarians from a podium in Mombasa, and his words proved particularly irresistible for analysis into their deeper meaning, having been spoken so close to the end of his life.
If we allow the forces of darkness and prejudice to divide us again, if we descend into the depths of violence, as we did in the aftermath of the last elections, the world will give us no second chance.
After giving a rousing speech on the afternoon of June the 8th, a speech that would prove almost prophetic, George Saitoti was supposed to spend the night on this bed in this room. After all the members of parliament who listened to his speech that day were booked in this very same hotel. But he didn't. He instead booked another hotel within Mombasa from Nairobi and went and slept there, giving the key to this room to one of his bodyguards. His bodyguard spent the night here and left the following day, even leaving with a key card. But why George Saitoti never spent the night in room 213, we may never know.
For Saitoti, I can't say much. He did check in, but the bodyguards did check him in. They took the key, they left.
The invoice from room 213 confirms that Saitoti did not sleep here. This is not the late Internal Security Minister's signature. It's his bodyguard Joshua Tonge who appended his signature to this invoice. In retrospect, his actions seemed very cautious. But were they too cautious? After all, Saitoti was a man who decades ago had escaped a very painful death.
At the time when Uko was dying, there was no difference, was a different or a day. I was poisoned. And that's a fact. I was the Vice President of the Republic of Kenya.
George Saitoti, over 20 years ago, barely survived an attempt to kill him with poison. Ironically, the same poison that all these years later may be, at least from anecdotal evidence, part of the mystery in the air crash that killed him: cyanide. The chemical compound cyanide is every bit as infamous as any depiction of its effects suggest, and whoever put it in Saitoti's meal knew as much. Saitoti may have been lucky then, but most ironically, even the hint that cyanide poisoning may have had something to do with this death last year didn't even register mention publicly. It may well be that cyanide was not the cause of death on that fateful flight, but attempts to pursue leads pointing even anecdotally in that direction were not made once the investigations into what caused the June 10th crash were underway. That and many more glaring loose ends or unpursued leads gave rise to theories around the death of Saitoti and his 5 ill-fated companions on that early morning helicopter flight.
I have been informed.
In Parliament, just days after June the 10th, there were those who volunteered a theory of yet another murder plot against the minister, one that this time worked.
Is this government working together or against each other? And back again we go to the question, was there a grand scheme within government to do away with our colleagues?
The Minister for Transport set up an inquiry under the Civil Aviation Act to investigate the cause of the accident, but the investigators have been frustrated by the ministry by not providing the required assistance and facilitation.
The question Kenyans are asking is, if today your boss was to have the kind of accident that happened to Honorable Saitoti and Honorable Jode, and you are the police commissioner and you arrive at the scene, and you leave without having secured the scene, and leave the vice president to answer questions when the person lying there, whose body has not even been collected, is your boss.
Could it be that there is some truth to this? And if so, why? Was Saitoti the victim of a horrific crash that nobody could have seen coming? Or was it more choreographed to the sinister desires of people that wanted Saitoti out of the way? Or did the effects of a series of seemingly unrelated events around the servicing of the AS350 cumulate, resulting in the crash? The funerals for all who died may already have been held, but a number of pieces of evidence from the crash, the details of the 10-minute flight of the AS350, and a number of statements and omissions from all those who had something to do with the helicopter could provide answers that have, so far, eluded the public. So, as the Kalpana Rawal team began its first sittings to hear evidence to establish what caused the June helicopter crash, the inside story began its own parallel investigation into those loose ends and leads left to turn cold about the morning that they fell from the sky. Johannesburg, South Africa. One of Africa's largest and most advanced cities. Almost every international company of repute has its African headquarters here. And it is here where the story of the Eurocopter AS350 model begins. On December the 5th, 2011, the helicopter, flown by Police Air Wing Commandant Rogers Mbithi and Eurocopter appointed ferry pilot Jerry Broberg, would take off from the Grand Central Airport in Midrand, Johannesburg. They would fly from there to Mozambique's capital, Maputo. After Maputo, they would take off again, this time overflying Malawi and landing in Dar es Salaam, the capital of Kenya's southern neighbor, Tanzania. Mbithi and Broberg would then fly the helicopter to the Police Air Wing hangar at Nairobi's Wilson Airport, touching down in Kenya on the 7th of December 2011, 2 days after their trip had begun. Almost immediately, the helicopter was deployed into service. This series of events depicts, as close as possible to the facts availed to KTN's inside story, what happened 7 months and 3 days after that helicopter was flown from the Grand Central Airport in Midrand, Johannesburg. George Saitoti, Orwa Ojode, Sergeant Thomas Muremi and Inspector Joshua Tongay climbed into the passenger cabin of the police's AS350 helicopter. Shortly after, Captains Nancy Getwanja and Luko Yugi begin the helicopter's startup protocols as they would on any other day. Falcon 230 was Captain Nancy Getwanja's call sign, but it was Luko Yugi who made all communications that morning.
Good morning, Falcon 230.
Falcon 230, go ahead. We are ready to lift off. 6 on board, 3¼ hours, destination Dewa.
According to individuals who heard the actual voice recording of communications between the chopper and the Wilson Airport control tower, Oyugi's voice is clear and without hindrance.
Falcon 230 surface wind is calm. Clear lift with a left turn out.
Clear lift, left, turn out Falcon 230.
Falcon Airborne 32, next report zone out. Next zone, Falcon 230.
Between minutes 1 and 2 of takeoff, Oyugi and Getwanja take the advised course, and between minutes 3 and 6, reach the helicopter's highest altitude of 7,051 feet, flying at 111 knots. For those 6 minutes, the helicopter flies without incident. In minute 7, the helicopter is about to reach what is known as the zone boundary over Ngong Forest. The zone boundary is the outer limit of Wilson Airport's airspace. Oyugi reports back to Wilson's air control tower.
Tower Falcon 230 will be checking zone out in 3 next 1 minute.
Falcon 230 118.5. Center 118.5. Good day, sir.
Good day.
After this communication, it all goes wrong. Instead of proceeding in the direction of their destination, Ndhiwa, the helicopter is turned back to the direction of Wilson Airport. It then makes another turn back. For 3 minutes, there is complete radio silence. Neither Oyugi nor Captain Getwanja make any attempt to reach either the Wilson Airport control tower or the Jomo Kenyatta International Airport control tower. After just 10 minutes after the helicopter takes off, it crashes, killing everybody on board. "10 minutes that killed a minister, with 180 seconds out of that time that revealed nothing. Or does it? There may have been no communication between the helicopter and any air traffic control tower, but the helicopter was fitted with a tracking device that may unravel just what happened in those 3 minutes after the helicopter reached the Ngong Forest. The AS-350 helicopter was fitted with a Skytrack global positioning satellite tracking device set to record the helicopter's flight path every 60 seconds. By mapping the point of impact on the ground in Kibiku and following the helicopter's GPS coordinates as it flew, we were able to come up with the helicopter's likely trajectory before the crash. After hitting the zone boundary, here, the helicopter's flight trajectory begins to change. It seemingly turns back, losing altitude gradually. At the last point where the Skytrack GPS tracks the helicopter's flight path, it is at 6,949 feet above the ground, flying at a speed of 111 knots or 205 kilometers per hour. Information that emerged after the crash was that the helicopter hit a tree on the way down and crashed at this point. According to a source, the diagram of the helicopter's trajectory implies that there may have been no input from the pilots, and that is why it spiraled downwards to where it crashed. If this document is correct, that would mean that between the 6th and the 10th minute, Captain Getwanja and Luko Yugi may not have touched the helicopter's controls. This document by itself doesn't prove much, and seen on its own could only add to speculation about the physical or mental status of the pilots. But seen in the context of the autopsies of all 6 of the deceased, the document is invaluable. By 12 p.m. on June the 10th, all 6 bodies of the deceased are taken from Kibiku to the Lee Funeral Home in Nairobi's city center. Forensic pathologists Johansen Oduor and Dorothy Njero and forensic orthodontist Amritpal Marina Kalsi begin what will be a 6-hour autopsy of all 6 bodies. Oduor begins dictating what he observes from each body.
Body number B1, burns on outer part of the body. Brain cavity completely empty. Cause of death?
With almost unfailing consistency, the conclusion from all 6 autopsy reports is multiple injuries and burns due to accident. An almost obvious conclusion considering the state of the bodies after the crash. But he misses one thing, an observation that most pathologists would have made. Indeed, just by looking at the photographs of the bodies from the crash, even the 2 doctors working with him on the autopsies noticed this key characteristic on the bodies.
The exposed tissues show a bright red discoloration, which is consistent with the cherry red appearance.
There is no mention of cherry pink appearance on any of the post-mortem reports that are in front of you, is there?
That is true. There is no such reference.
When you look at the photographs that are in front of you, do you see a cherry pink appearance?
Yes.
Is it mentioned in the reports?
It is not mentioned in the reports.
We were able to obtain confidential copies of these pictures. We looked through the pictures of the bodies from the crash as well as those taken by the police at the Lee Funeral Home. Hard as it may have been to do so, we also noticed the cherry pink discoloration in some of the bodies. This discoloration is important because it often suggests one of 2 kinds of poisoning: carbon monoxide poisoning or cyanide poisoning.
The cherry pink discoloration, whereas it is manifested and documented so, for cases of carbon monoxide inhalation, let's call it inhalation, we get off from what I was complaining about. It is also manifested in cyanide, isn't it? Isn't it the same or similar?
Yes, I have read literature that says that cyanide poisoning can produce that cherry pink discoloration.
Each of them also had traces of soot in their tracheas and respiratory cavities. And going back to the autopsy reports made by Oduor Johansen and his team, the cause of death for all 6 was the impact of the crash.
Could you explain how soot can go to the trachea? A sentence or 2.
Well, basically, you'd have to be breathing for you to be able to inhale carbon particles. When you open the trachea, then you'd be able to see the carbon deposits within the walls of the trachea.
The presence of soot in the tracheas meant that some part of the helicopter must have been on fire while it was in the air, and that enough smoke may have got into the cabin for all of them to have traces of soot left inside their respiratory tract. In his request for a toxicological exam of the blood of Captain Gitwanja, Noyugi and George Saitoti, Dr. Johansen asked for a number of tests to be ran. Surprisingly, he didn't ask for a test to check the levels of carbon monoxide in the 3 deceased's blood. Nor did he ask for tests to eliminate the possibility that there may have also been a very deadly substance in the helicopter's cabin air, but someone else did. Chief Inspector Moses Mwangi, who was at the scene of the accident, asked that the stomach, liver, kidney and blood of 3 of the 6 crash victims be tested by the government chemist independent of Oduor's team. They were Nancy Getwanja, Luko Yugi and George Saitoti. And 1 month after the crash, on the 10th of July 2012, government analyst Joyce Wairimu handed in the report of her analysis of the internal organs sent to her. One of the toxicological reports she made had a conclusion absent in all the others.
Carbon monoxide was detected in the blood of the deceased at a concentration of 14.0 mls per 100 mls of blood, indicating a level of 68.6% carboxyhemoglobin.
From this report, Lukoyugi was in the throes of serious carbon monoxide poisoning, it would seem. Lukoyugi was also the de facto captain on that flight. Dr. Dorothy Njero would, during the Commission of Inquiry into the crash, explain the significance of having those levels of carbon monoxide in the body of the deceased.
The classical cherry pink color of carboxyhemoglobin is usually evident in the saturation of the blood exceeds about 30%. Therefore, the presence of the cherry red discoloration in these bodies may suggest that they had levels exceeding 30% going by the reviewed literature.
But in all the post-mortem reports made, none lists what else was being tested for. The refrain in all of them, apart from the note on carbon monoxide poisoning, is the same.
The post-mortem specimens were examined for chemically toxic substances with negative results.
It is not clear whether the government chemist tested the samples for a chemical substance that manifests much in the same way as carbon monoxide, if only to eliminate it as a possible toxicant, cyanide. Dr. Sophie Mukuna is a toxicologist and microbiologist and the owner of Biotech Laboratory in Nairobi. In her opinion, all the signs on the bodies of the deceased would make for obvious decisions when deciding what to test for, and cyanide would be one of those things.
I think that would be a priority. If you saw those distinct signs, and from your own experience as a pathologist, you would go directly and say, why don't we rule out the possibility that either carbon monoxide or cyanide poisoning is present.
A fire on the helicopter could likely have released carbon monoxide, but cyanide vapors can also be produced in a fire.
Carbon monoxide would be present in any fire. So with the cyanide scenario, it's very specific. There has to be nitrogen-containing material. So you'd be looking at plastics, you'd be looking at clothing, some fabrics contain nitrogen. So that is very specific to cyanide poisoning.
Why didn't Dr. Oduor make note of this when asking for a toxicological exam? Why didn't he make note of the obvious cherry pink discoloration on the bodies in his dictation or final report? To his juniors, it was obvious enough.
With the background of a body that is significantly involved in burn injuries, then the bright red discoloration is suggestive of carbon monoxide poisoning or inhalation.
Yes. So that's with the additional observations that you did when you observed in your participation, which are not captured in the report.
Yes, Your Honor.
The fact that Dr. Johansen could have missed a key element that could prove that George Saitoti and the 5 others on that flight may have passed out or died well before the crash happened may have been a coincidence. But added to the fact that when his team asked for further tests on the blood samples that they had sent to the government chemist to be done, the government chemist's response was that those samples had dried up. That raises some serious questions. How, in the case of the death of such an important minister, could the response of a government agency dealing with the investigation into that case say that the blood had dried up? Be that as it may, the commission had the power to call back Dr. Johansen to account for his actions, or indeed anybody from the government chemist to explain how the blood samples in such an important case could have just been left to dry up. Those 3 incidents are just one coincidence too many. What would Dr. Oduor Johansen's motivation be for overlooking such key evidence? Was it a mere oversight, or was he following some orders?
I, Dr. Amritpal Khalsi, do swear that the evidence I shall give before this commission, touching on the matter in question, shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help me God.
A statement from his junior, Amritpal Khalsi, to the commission may speak volumes about these omissions because it indicated an unseen hand in the management of information gleaned from the autopsies.
Yesterday you mentioned about calls you received the day after post-mortem. You remember that discussion?
Yes.
Would you want to share with us those calls and the concern by the callers?
I was only called by our senior most colleague, Dr. Johansson Odwar, and he mentioned that we were not supposed to divulge any information, including photographs or the notes, or tell anybody about anything, and he had been given this information by NSIS.
Why would the National Security Intelligence Services be interested in the information from the autopsy? What could they have been trying to conceal? Who from the NSIS made this call to Dr. Odwar? When obvious clues about what may have played a part in the crash of the June 10th flight emerged, was it really the prerogative of the NSIS to manage that information? We have sent our questions to the head of the NSIS, Michael Geshangi, via a letter.
The letters are in the...
Taking it to the NSIS headquarters ourselves for his response to all of these queries. It was received on his behalf. Neither Geshangi nor any other officer from the NSIS have responded to our letter. The document mapping the helicopter's flight path and patterns also indicated that in the 3 minutes before the crash, there was no input from the pilots. Inhalation of carbon monoxide in large amounts can cause a person to fall unconscious. The amounts of carbon poisoning found in Lukoyugi, based on the cherry-pink discoloration of their flesh, may indicate that both of them may have been unconscious or even dead before the helicopter crashed. Also, based on the injuries that each of them sustained according to their autopsy reports, it is highly possible that if they did not die mid-air, then the impact of the helicopter crashing into the ground killed them instantly. That would mean that if there indeed was a fire on the helicopter, it was alight before the crash. Both pilots Nancy Getwanja and Lukoyugi were noted to have markedly high levels of carbon monoxide in their bodies. Why would a 7-month-old helicopter catch fire mid-flight? What part of the helicopter caught fire? Or was there a leak of carbon monoxide into the cabin without there necessarily being a fire? From start to finish, the flight that ended in the death of George Saitoti and 5 others lasted about 10 minutes. How long would carbon monoxide poisoning take to kill a person? We put this question to forensic toxicologist Sophie Mukuna.
Well, depending on the concentration, it doesn't take very long. It could be out in 10 minutes. It could be unconscious, then leading to eventual death. So it's not a long process.
To find that answer, stretching the timeline beyond the 10 minutes that led to the crash to the day the helicopter began making its journey to Kenya may be the past information that became prologue to the crash and subsequent death of 6 Kenyans, including a minister. December the 7th, 2011, the Eurocopter AS-350B helicopter arrives in Kenya from South Africa. The helicopter has already been flown for 200 hours, or approximately 8 days, an amount of time that would, after June the 10th, become very significant. Here's why. After the crash, we were able to obtain a copy of the helicopter's manufacturer's book. A manufacturer's book states, among other things, the duration after which the helicopter must be serviced, called a mandatory maintenance program. In this case, there were 2 options as to when the helicopter had to undergo this program, either after 15 hours of flight or after 7 days, or after 25 hours of flight or 14 days. By the time the helicopter had reached Nairobi, having flown for 200 hours, it had undergone just 2 maintenance sessions. David Njuguna is an aviation expert with 31 years of experience as an aeronautical engineer. According to him,
if an aircraft does exceed the scheduled interval that is prescribed, that is recommended by the manufacturer and approved by the KCA, you are in breach of the requirements of the airworthiness requirements.
Humphrey Bulimu is one of the first witnesses to testify at the Commission of Inquiry into the causes of the helicopter crash. He's about to have one of the most difficult days of his career, laying bare what was the most worrying start to the 7 months that this helicopter operated. In this more than 2-hour testimony, Bulimu would reveal that the servicing of the AS-350 was not satisfactory, that he wasn't certified by the Kenya Civil Aviation Authority to service it.
Do your seniors know that you do this pre-flight without a license from KCA? Do they know that?
I'll take you back maybe.
Do they know that you don't have a license but you've been doing pre-flights? It's a simple question. Yes or no?
Yes, they know.
They know.
But of all Bulimu's missteps, he was never fully in charge of the maintenance and service of the aircraft. One man in particular, though, became the focus not just of the Commission of Inquiry into the crash, but to our investigations as well.
Evidence I shall give before this commission that she is on the matter in question shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. So help me God.
A man who, through testimony at the Kalpana Commission, is introduced to Kenya as Aristide Lumumu. Aristide is a Congolese national hired by Eurocopter for service and maintenance of the chopper during its 1-year warranty. His qualifications read like that of many engineers across the world, learning the trade from the workshop floor, eventually becoming a trusted member of the Eurocopter team. He holds an engineer's license from the South Africa Aviation Authority, but his qualifications have no standing here.
The law is very particular. You cannot work or certify a Kenya registered aircraft unless you have got authorization from the Kenya Civil Aviation Authority.
A check with the Kenya Civil Aviation Authority shows that Aristide did not have a local practicing license, nor did he have any local validation of the licenses that he carried. Yet, on Aristide's shoulders would be placed the responsibility of catering for a 250 million shilling helicopter.
Avionics includes electrical power, correct?
Yes.
Electrical power in any aircraft is a major component. True or not true?
It is true.
It could actually be the cause of problems. True?
It's true.
And I'm not ruling it out, as I'll demonstrate towards the end of my questions. Avionics includes instruments. True?
True.
The instruments that guide the pilot, the two pilots, all that is part of avionics, correct?
It is correct.
So if the instruments are telling the pilot he's going west and he's going south, right?
Yes.
It is a fault in the instrumentation, isn't it?
It is.
Avionics includes radio, correct?
Yes.
If the radio is faulty, the pilot cannot be in communication with control tower or with other aircraft in the vicinity, correct?
It is.
And most important, avionics includes the navigation equipment. True?
It is.
On all those things I have told you, you are not trained to undertake any work in respect to those activities. Correct?
Yes.
Aristide's significance isn't about his qualifications though. Rather, it extends to the very loose arrangement that the Kenya Police Air Wing and Eurocopter had in servicing of the helicopter. Every helicopter, once imported into a country, must be serviced by an approved maintenance organization.
Before an aircraft is put on the Kenya register, the Civil Aviation Authority requires that the operator has a maintenance plan, i.e. the facilities, the personnel, and also the tooling and parts for the required maintenance on the aircraft.
But you, sir, you came to Nairobi as a lone ranger, correct? Were you with any other colleague or you are alone?
I was alone.
You were alone.
Yes.
So, we have now Aristide alone at Wilson Airport with a few spanners, correct?
Yes, a toolbox. Yeah.
A toolbox. Yeah. And the other thing you had is a laptop.
Yes.
And a telephone.
Yes.
Eurocopter had an arrangement for the servicing of its aircrafts with Everett Aviation, but would terminate this arrangement, stating that they would be setting up their own AMO. This maintenance organization, as it turned out, was the one-man show that is Aristide Lomumu. In the police air wing hangar, you'll very often find maintenance work on the various aircrafts. They are an approved maintenance organization for some of them, but the AS-350 was not among them. Why would the air wing leave itself liable to responsibility for anything that could and did go wrong with the helicopter? While in South Africa, we made a visit to Eurocopter's Africa headquarters to get clarity on Aristide, among a litany of other issues that we needed answers on. Pilots from the police air wing collected a helicopter that had just been procured by the Kenyan government, flying through Mozambique, Dar es Salaam and into Nairobi. 7 months later, on June the 10th, that same helicopter crashed in Ngong's Kibiko area, killing George Saitoti, Orwa Ojode and 4 others. Now we want to go in and ask about the state of that helicopter because there has been some controversy about how well serviced that helicopter was. They said they would contact us but never did, choosing instead to rely on the statement of Eurocopter's CEO to the commission into the crash. He too would have quite a long day when he was on the stand.
We are here on a contract that was executed by Eurocopter together with their customer, and that contract specifies a product. And it is not an answer in Kenyan law, as far as we know, to say we have entered this contract, but because you people do not know very much, we are giving you a superior commodity. That is not an answer.
Still, there is evidence that even before the helicopter reached Kenya, it was not, in its entirety, the aircraft that the police tendering committee had approved, bought and paid for. Before the aircraft was handed over to the Kenya Police Air Wing, a key part of the aircraft had been changed. The aircraft's Vehicle Engine Malfunction Display, or VEMD, a part that alerts pilots on malfunctions on any part of the aircraft, a very crucial part, was replaced with a prototype. The Commission of Inquiry made note of this after presenting its report to President Kibaki.
Any malfunctions was to be shown on that VMD, but instead of the real one, the prototype VMD was installed on 4th December 2011 before the aircraft came to us, and after our authorities has already given pre-inspection.
There are 3 items that could have helped establish whether improper service could have contributed to the causes of the crash. The aircraft's vehicle engine malfunction display, which had been replaced with a prototype by Eurocopter, the FADEC, or Final Authority Digital Control System, which is the interface between the pilot and the engine, could have indicated whether Getwanja and Oyugi were in control of the helicopter after minute 6. The Skytrack GPS system in the helicopter, which would give a more accurate indication of the helicopter's flight path than the 1-minute interval indications that it would ping back to the Wilson Airport. These 3 items were sent abroad for analysis, but nothing could be retrieved from them, with analysts saying that they were too badly damaged by fire for them to be useful. Citing whether there was a fire on the helicopter before the crash, at what point in the flight did this fire occur, and where it came from without these 3 items is very difficult. However, the autopsies, especially those of Luke Oyugi and Nancy Getwanja, point to there being a fire before the helicopter crashed, and that the 2 pilots were most affected by carbon monoxide poisoning. Could there have been an electrical fault in the engine that caused a fire whose fumes Getwanja and Oyugi were most exposed to? That could be true. The helicopter's battery, it was revealed during the inquiry, was not properly maintained. If the battery was overcharged, it could have caused a fire. When retrieved, the helicopter's battery was burnt out. Did it catch a fire before or after the crash? Finally, the government's role in the collection of the correct chain of evidence to find the cause of the crash is something worth looking into. especially with regard to one key element that survived the crash: George Saitoti's cell phone. Pieces of the wreckage were found strewn all over the place and collected by locals, the police and others who walked through the scene of the crash. But how George Saitoti's phone wound up in the hands of an administration police corporal, Evans Kiprotich, and be in use for 1 month without the police's knowledge begs serious questions about how seriously the investigation was being taken. Kiprotich, after it emerged that he had Saitoti's phone, was called into the Criminal Investigations Department for questioning. He was later released and rearrested and charged. We traveled to the administration police post where Kiprotich was found.
If an officer is involved in such a situation, what steps do you have laid down in the administration police?
Seriously, this is a total summary dismissal from the service. This is giving a very bad picture to administration police service, even before and now under these new transactions. Even before, if an officer involved in such crime, or even lesser than this, we don't condone.
He was later posted back to the administration police post in Kibiku, where he claims he was training as an athlete when he found the phone. He wasn't present when we made our visit to the camp. We have made several attempts to contact him, but to no avail. We also hand-delivered our questions about Evans Kiprotich to the office of Ndegwa Mohoro, the current director of the Criminal Investigations Department. He's yet to respond to our questions. We also sent our questions about Evans Kiprotich to Inspector General David Kemayo. About a month after doing so, we received a response from an officer mandated to respond on his behalf. According to the police, Kiprotich recovered Saitoti's Nokia E63 from 2 young men who had just left the scene of the crash in Kibiku. He was unable to give any details about the 2 young men. Thus, the police were unable to question them about how they got the phone. The letter continues, stating that on the 14th of November 2012, Kiprotich was arraigned in court before the Resident Magistrates Court in Kiambu and charged with stealing and handling stolen property. He pleaded guilty to both counts and was fined 30,000 shillings. While admitting that Saitoti's phone indeed was active from the date that he died, the 10th of June 2012 to the 30th of June 2012, it makes no mention of who was being called or who made calls to this handset. In our possession is a call log from Saitoti's phone after June the 10th. There are 42 calls made and received on that phone since the 10th, the day that Saitoti died. Out of these 42 calls, 31 have been made to one phone number. We have also checked who that number belongs to. From the duration of calls made, it would seem that Kiprotich may have handed the phone over to someone who he was calling. Who did Kiprotich hand the phone over to? What information was he able to glean from the late Internal Security Minister's phone? That may be a particularly important question considering Saitoti's diary for the week following June the 10th, 2012.
We are already having organized criminal gangs. They are there. Matters of trafficking.
If Saitoti had lived through the weekend, on Tuesday the 13th of June 2012, he would have tabled a report that he had promised to weeks before his death, a report on the illegal drug trade in Kenya.
The final report is going to take quite a while. The narcotics unit, Madam Speaker, are doing a commendable job, and sooner we will come up with the names of those who are involved in the drugs.
Since the interception of the 6.4 billion shilling cocaine haul in 2004, Kenya has been on the world's radar screens concerning the international illicit drug trade. With increasing frequency, hard drugs have been transited through the country almost unencumbered. KTN investigative reporters Dennis Ontarigo and Mohammed Ali uncovered part of the deadly drug trade, forcing a groundswell of public outrage and demands for answers.
Are you telling us that then we have to wait for Chicho Pevu
to give us the account of day to day of what happened.
Answers which, according to individuals close to Saitoti, he was going to give in full in Parliament. Represented by former US Ambassador to Kenya, Michael Rannenberger, the United States released a dossier naming 5 high-profile individuals as being key players in the drug trade in Kenya.
Honorable Bugi himself. Yes, Mr. Speaker, that's what there is. Honorable Joho, Honorable Mwao, and Honorable Kabogo. There's also another businessman who his name is a fellow called Mr. Ali Pujani.
They also froze the US assets of former Kilomia MP John Harun Mwao over his alleged kingpin role in the international drug trade.
The House must protect my integrity and those of others.
It is very unfortunate, Mr. Speaker, that he had to rely on gossip just to tarnish our names.
On the date of the crash, 45 minutes before taking off, Saitoti met with U.S. Undersecretary for African Affairs Johnny Carson at the Wilson Airport VIP lounge. What transpired in that meeting? Was the illegal drug trade on the agenda? Did they discuss the report that Saitoti was to table but never did? With the crash, Saitoti's life came to an abrupt end, but also lost to the world was a report he was supposed to table. We have spoken to very close confidants of the late minister, people who would know where Saitoti would have kept this report. They claim that the report cannot be found. Did Saitoti's phone, found in the possession of one Evans Kiprotich, have any clues that the people who may have wanted this information lost could have followed?
If Saitoti was going to present this report to Parliament, then who knows? Although if the report is within the ministry itself, it can still be presented without him being there. The memory does exist. But Saitoti was the kind of guy who you were not going to compromise with drug money if you were a drug dealer, because he was already a wealthy fellow. But if you had a peasant from some rural place somewhere as Minister for Internal Security, you give him a bag of money, he forgets the story. But Saitoti is the kind of guy you will not compromise.
In the course of the sittings of the Commission of Inquiry, it was claimed that 2 unknown individuals were seen at the police air wing hangar on the evening of June the 9th, the day before Saitoti climbed aboard the helicopter that would eventually kill him and 5 others. The police claimed that the hangar is not under CCTV surveillance and that the officers guarding the hangar saw no unauthorized people access the hangar that evening. A copy of the visitor's book, which details the visits of every person that does not have accreditation to access the hangar on a regular basis, has no entries between the 5th of June and the 12th of June. But when we visited the hangar, we saw for ourselves CCTV cameras in various positions around the hangar. Upon asking some of the officers present there, the response was that the cameras were not working. This was not what the Commission, and by extension the public, had been told. We were also shown where the crashed helicopter has been stored. It is locked in this container, and the keys for the 2 padlocks on the container door are kept by 2 different officers, we're told. We're also informed that the hangar is very heavily guarded. But behind the container, construction work is currently underway on the outer face of the hangar. That would pose a serious security risk to the remaining parts of the chopper and the investigation itself if someone were to use that area to access the container. The Commission, in its findings, also stated that pilot error was also to blame for the crash, stating that both Oyugi and Gitwanja were not sufficiently experienced to fly in the bad weather that presented itself on that morning. On the face of it, this seems like a plausible cause. A look through Oyugi's records revealed that he failed numerous KCAA exams and was not accredited to fly the AS-350, despite having experience flying other helicopters. Collectively, both Getwanja and Oyugi have half the flight experience needed to fly the AS-350. This is not represented in either of their logs. Here's why. When a pilot flies an aircraft, he's supposed to log the number of flight hours that he flew, whether or not he has a co-pilot. But what Getwanja and Oyugi seem to have done is logged hours that they flew as well as ones during which they were co-pilots. Also, on the evening before the flight at about 6 p.m. onwards, Aristide Lomumu is said to have met both Gitwanja and Oyugi while they had a drink at Dambasta's pub, which is located right outside Wilson Airport. Two things are important about this meeting. One is that in this meeting they're said to have discussed Aristide's concerns that the FADEC, which records the interaction between the pilot and the engine, had indicated an engine data recorder fault. Eurocopter's response via email was that the helicopter could still fly even with this EDR failure. The FADEC, in the process of recording the pilot's interaction with the helicopter engine, can also record any electrical faults that the helicopter's engine may have had. The police air wing's policy on quote-unquote bottle to throttle, or the number of hours between drinking alcohol and operating an aircraft that a pilot must adhere to, states that the pilot should not drink at least 8 hours before operating an aircraft. Was this respected by Gitwanja and Oyugi? That Nancy Gitwanja and Luke Oyugi's experience may have been called into question by the Commission would seem fair, but there still are many unanswered questions about why they were on that flight in the first place. Air Wing Commandant Rogers Mbidi and Captain Kuto were the ones who were supposed to be flying George Saitoti as well as Orwa Ojode that following morning, but they called Nancy Gitwanja and Luke Oyugi the night before, asking them to take their place. Now, the Kenya Police Air Wing's standing orders are very clear and state in black and white that when ferrying a VIP, the senior most pilot from the Air Wing is supposed to be on duty. And Rogers Mbidi fits that bill perfectly as the commandant. In fact, he was there that morning that they took off. No sooner had the helicopter crashed in Kibiko area than people started commenting about bad weather as being a probable cause of the accident. But in his statement to the Commission of Inquiry into the crash, Captain Kuto, who was in the rescue chopper looking for that crash site, said that whereas the weather was not clear, he could see people on the ground directing him to the crash. From thousands of feet in the air, if the weather is that bad, would he have been able to see those people? Yet, even in the face of this, there still remain outstanding questions about the crash. Unfinished autopsies deny the public the truth about what actually killed the 6 aboard the helicopter. A lethargic police force and accident investigation department sat by as a commission, hamstrung by the lack of evidence presented before it, or perhaps protected by this shortage, sought to get answers. What the Commission report unveiled was shoddy investigations and institutional weaknesses that allowed for improper service to take place. The public now knows for sure the open secret that the government chemist is understaffed and woefully under-equipped to perform an investigation that would give the bereaved some solace. All of this seems to circle around the truth that the families and the public want to know. What exactly happened in the 10 minutes of flight time? Were they victims of a series of failures that were built to safeguard flight safety? Or were the 6 on that flight murdered? The only people who know this for certain share that truth, and they unwillingly took it to their graves. And it took just 10 minutes to kill them all.
What is on my mind is between God and myself.
you.